In the depths of uncharted space, far beyond the reach of Imperial patrols, a small Terran vessel drifted silently against the stars, its hull barely visible against the backdrop of the black void. Inside its cockpit, a lone figure sat staring at the console with steady eyes. The ship was ancient, a relic from the early days of human expansion, but its purpose was more significant than its appearance suggested. The captain of the ship, Commander Ilara Quinn, was resolute. She wasn't alone, though her team was scattered across the galaxy. They were united by one goal. The transmission was ready, and it would change everything. Ilara's fingers hovered over the control panel. As the time came, she pressed a series of buttons with precision, her voice unwavering. As she began the transmission across the galaxy, a simple phrase would echo into the heart of the Empire, a message they could never ignore. The hum of the ship's engine seemed to fade as her voice cut through the cold silence of space. "You've crossed the line." She didn't need to say more. The words alone held the weight of centuries of suffering, injustice, and oppression at the hands of the Galactic Empire. It was a phrase that embodied everything humanity had endured since the day they were first discovered by the galaxy at large, weak, defenseless, unworthy of being more than pawns for the Empire's grand designs. But humanity had changed. They were no longer the helpless creatures of their earliest days. They had grown and adapted in ways no one anticipated. The transmission was sent as a single pulse of energy, a message encoded with layers of complexity, so that only those who understood the human mind could decode it. The Empire would dismiss it at first. They would call it the ramblings of a desperate few who had failed to realize their place in the galaxy. But that was exactly the point. They hadn't realized anything. Humanity had been underestimated for far too long, and this would be their reckoning. As Ilara looked out into the dark expanse of space, her heart pounded in her chest. There was no turning back now. The transmission would reach every corner of the galaxy, from the outer rim to the heart of the Empire. It would shake the foundations of everything the Empire believed in. For too long, humanity had been the hunted, the oppressed, but the time had come for them to turn the tables. Back in the heart of the Galactic Empire, high above the endless sprawl of its capital world, the transmission reached the Imperial Command Center. It was an ordinary day or so. It seemed the officers monitoring the constant flow of intelligence and communications from across the galaxy were accustomed to threats from lesser species. But as the message hit their screens, there was an undeniable chill in the air. The Imperial officer who received the transmission was a young lieutenant who had never seen anything quite like it. A direct message from a human ship, no more than a few hundred kilometers away from one of the Empire's outer territories, and yet the words were clear, the message unmistakable: "You've crossed the line." The lieutenant hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to make of the message. He had never encountered anything like it before. The human race was a distant memory, a nuisance to be swept aside. So what did this mean? What did this human ship think it could do? It didn't take long for the Empire's command structure to react. The message was labeled as insignificant, a minor annoyance at best. But there was something about it, something in the way the message was transmitted, that made the officer's gut twist uneasily, as though he had just felt the first stirrings of a storm on the horizon. The Imperial Command Center buzzed with routine operations after the message came through, yet the lieutenant couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. Something about that simple phrase, "You've crossed the line," gnawed at his instincts. It was too personal, too direct, and unlike any threat they'd faced before. Despite the orders to ignore the transmission, he couldn't let it go, not yet. Across the galaxy, the message rippled outward, as though it were a pebble thrown into a pond, each echo carrying the weight of an unspoken promise. Humanity had been pushed too far. They had endured oppression and cruelty at the hands of the Empire for generations, and now they were ready to fight back. What the Empire didn't know was that it wasn't just a few scattered ships issuing a desperate cry for help. This was something more. The Imperial response was swift at first. The lieutenant's report reached the higher command, and the transmission was deemed unworthy of attention. They were busy with more pressing matters. After all, the Empire had its eyes set on conquering new worlds, expanding its dominion, and crushing any resistance in its path. But a subtle tension began to rise within the higher ranks. There were whispers of rebellion on the fringes and rumors of humanity's hidden strength. The Empire had always underestimated them. Perhaps that had been their mistake. Admiral Valrex, the Empire's most decorated officer, was called to handle the situation. She was known for her ruthlessness and unyielding strategy. No threat had ever slipped past her radar, and she wasn't about to let a small human ship break that record. She had little patience for those who dared challenge the might of the Empire. When Valrex arrived at the command center, the lieutenant immediately briefed her on the situation. The transmission was dismissed as a meaningless act of defiance, but Valrex didn't share their confidence. He had seen too many empires fall because they ignored the whispers of revolt. She had heard the rumors of human ingenuity, their ability to turn the impossible into reality. She hadn't yet encountered anything to prove those rumors true, but there was something in the back of her mind that told her to tread carefully. Valrex ordered a scan of the coordinates from which the transmission originated. It was a sector near the outer rim known for its emptiness. There was little to find in the vast expanse of cold space, but the Empire had long prided itself on its ability to control every corner of the galaxy, and so even this seemingly insignificant region had been mapped and monitored for potential threats. As the scans completed, something unusual appeared on the readouts. A small cluster of ships detected far off the usual Imperial routes. For the first time in decades, humanity had built a fleet that wasn't simply a handful of defunct or outdated vessels, but a growing force capable of causing real damage to the Empire's interests. Valrex's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the data. This was not what she expected, and there was something unsettling about it. The way the ships moved, their tactics were too coordinated for them to be a ragtag group of rebels or dissidents. No, they were organized and trained, and more importantly, they had a purpose. Back in the heart of the galaxy, the Imperial Senate convened an emergency session. The sudden appearance of a human fleet, even a small one, was troubling the senators, ever concerned with their own positions and survival. Demanded an immediate response. Most favored sending a fleet to crush the human forces before they could pose any real threat, but there were those who argued that the matter should be handled more diplomatically. Perhaps this was merely a mistake, one that could be corrected with showings of strength. As the debate raged on, Admiral Valrex prepared for the inevitable. She knew that the time was fast approaching when the true nature of humanity would reveal itself, and she wasn't sure if the Empire was ready for what was coming their way. The debate in the Imperial Senate raged on for hours, with politicians arguing over the most prudent course of action. The more cautious members of the Senate suggested a diplomatic response, sending envoys to the human fleet with offers of peace and an assurance of continued Imperial dominance. But these voices were growing quieter, drowned out by the more aggressive factions who urged immediate military retaliation. The thought of humanity, once a fractured, resource-deprived species, daring to challenge the Galactic Empire, was an affront to their sense of superiority. Admiral Valrex sat at her command post, staring out at the vast expanse of space from her flagship's viewing window. It was a rare moment of peace before the storm, but even the serene view couldn't quell the growing tension inside her. She had faced countless threats throughout her career, but this was different. There was something about the human fleet that didn't sit right with her. The transmission had unsettled her too. "You've crossed the line." It wasn't the kind of message a defeated species sent. No, this was the kind of message from a species that had been patient, that had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And what did the humans have that the Empire hadn't accounted for? What hidden strength had they cultivated while the Empire busied itself with its expansionist conquests? Valrex had always prided herself on her ability to outthink her enemies, to anticipate their every move. But these humans, these Terrans, had done something she hadn't expected. They had turned the tables, and in doing so, had shown her something. They had the power to surprise. And that was the one thing she couldn't afford to ignore. Her fleet was massive and deadly, far more so than anything the humans could field. But the more she thought about it, the more the scale of the threat became apparent. If the humans could coordinate so effectively, if their ships could be so advanced, if they were truly ready to fight back, then the Empire had greatly miscalculated. Back at the human stronghold, Commander Ilara Quinn paced her cramped quarters, the weight of the galaxy seeming to press down on her shoulders. She had spent years preparing for this moment, building alliances, establishing covert military cells, and now everything rested on this singular act of defiance. She wasn't naive. She knew the Empire would respond with overwhelming force. She knew they would not take kindly to a species beneath them, no matter how many ships they had daring to challenge their authority. But that was the point. The Empire had overreached. It had grown complacent in its power. And now, humanity was ready to remind them just how dangerous a cornered species could be. Ilara had been in contact with resistance cells across the galaxy, and each report was the same. The Empire had underestimated them. They thought they were dealing with disorganized rebels, a handful of ships and outdated tech. But they were wrong. Every ship, every weapon, every tactic had been crafted for this moment. The Empire had drawn the line, and humanity was ready to cross it. As Ilara prepared to transmit once more, a new sense of determination filled her. The time had come. The message wasn't just about sending a warning anymore. It was about showing the Empire that the line they'd drawn had been crossed in ways they couldn't even comprehend. Humanity had evolved. They had risen from the ashes of their past, and now they would rewrite the future. The transmission went out again, a short burst of encoded data, but this time it was more than just a declaration. It was an invitation, an open call to all humans who had suffered under the Empire's rule, a summons to join the fight. There would be no more hiding, no more waiting for someone else to act. This was the beginning of something far greater than a rebellion. It was the birth of a new era. The Empire would be forced to take notice, whether they were ready or not. The message had been sent, and across the galaxy, a quiet ripple began to form, spreading from the edges of the outer rim to the deepest reaches of the Empire. It wasn't loud, not yet. It wasn't an explosion of force. It was something subtler, something far more dangerous, a growing awareness that humanity, long thought of as fractured and insignificant, was no longer the prey of the galaxy. They were the hunters now, and the prey was the Empire itself. Back in the heart of the Empire, Admiral Valrex studied the data with growing concern. She had expected a small disturbance, something easily crushed. What she didn't expect was the sudden spike in human activity. Resistance cells, long believed to be scattered and disjointed, were now communicating with a singular purpose. Something had changed, something that even the Empire's vast intelligence network hadn't anticipated. The humans were more organized than they appeared. And the worst part was, they were adapting at a speed that threatened to outpace the Empire's own technological advancements. Valrex's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. A few scattered raids, insignificant skirmishes. She had seen those before. But the consistency, the precision of these attacks spoke of a deliberate strategy. They weren't just hitting Imperial outposts randomly. They were striking at specific weaknesses, disabling supply lines, and sabotaging key infrastructure with a level of efficiency that suggested months, if not years, of planning. This wasn't the work of desperate rebels. This was the work of a force that knew exactly what it was doing. Meanwhile, in the Terran fleet, Commander Ilara Quinn watched the reports flood in, each one carrying news of yet another victory, however small. Each skirmish won, each outpost disrupted, was a victory in itself. But Ilara knew this wasn't the time to rest. The Empire would retaliate with everything they had. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. She gathered her team in the war room, a small, dimly lit space aboard the flagship Vanguard. The faces around the table were weary, some lined with the exhaustion of years spent in secret rebellion, others with the steely determination that had always defined humanity. But they were ready. They knew that everything they had done so far was just the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. "We've made our move," Ilara began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "The Empire will retaliate soon. And when they do, we need to be prepared. This won't be just another raid. This is going to be the fight that changes everything." A lieutenant at the table, a young officer named Kiran, spoke up, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and apprehension. But what if we're not ready? What if we've overestimated our capabilities? Ilara met his gaze, unwavering. We can't afford to wait for the perfect moment. We make our stand now, or we risk being crushed before we ever have a chance to prove ourselves. The Empire's weakness is in its arrogance. They think they can crush us with a single blow, but they don't know what we're capable of. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ilara wasn't just speaking about the strength of the Terran fleet. She was speaking about the willpower that had sustained humanity through centuries of oppression. The Empire might have had the firepower, but humanity had something they didn't: a relentless drive to survive, to fight back against the forces that sought to destroy them. The message we sent, Ilara continued, wasn't just a declaration of war. It was a rallying cry. Every human in the galaxy who suffered under Imperial rule is listening. And they're waiting for us to lead them. We have the momentum now, but we can't afford to lose it. Not now. Outside the window of the war room, the stars stretched out in every direction, a sea of possibilities. Humanity had spent too long as a footnote in the galaxy's history, too long beneath the boot of the Empire. But now, something had changed. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The time for survival was over. It was time to rise. And as the transmission echoed once more across the galaxy, it was clear that humanity was no longer the weak prey. They had become the predators, and the Empire had no idea what was about to hunt them down. The day the Empire decided to act was the day Admiral Valrex mobilized her fleet for the first major counteroffensive. She had been preparing for this moment ever since the first wave of human attacks disrupted Imperial control. She had underestimated them at first, but no longer. The threat had shifted from a minor annoyance to a potential full-scale rebellion. The Empire's pride had been wounded, and Valrex wasn't about to allow a scattered group of rebels, human or otherwise, to undermine the might of the Galactic Empire. She was seated in her command chair aboard the Imperium, the largest dreadnought in the Imperial fleet, her eyes scanning the holographic display of the galaxy's outer territories. She knew where to strike. She knew which systems had been hit hardest by the humans' raids, and she had already planned her retaliation. A display of Imperial force was needed to crush the human insurgency once and for all. Admiral, her tactical officer, Commander Liora, spoke up. We've identified the human fleet. Their movements are consistent with the reports we've received. They're gathering, preparing for something big. Their ships are scattered across a dozen systems, but they're not just hiding. They're organizing. Valrex's lips curled into a grim smile. Good. Let them come. We'll give them a taste of what happens when you defy the Empire. She looked at the star map once more, pinpointing the system where she would begin her assault, a remote cluster of planets where Terran forces had struck several times in recent months. The Empire had a garrison stationed there, but it had been undermanned and spread thin. Perfect. She could eliminate this rebellion swiftly and send a message to any other would-be insurrectionists. As her fleet moved into position, Valrex felt a familiar calm settle over her, a calm that only came from years of victory, from knowing the Empire's strength was unmatched. She knew what awaited her on the battlefield: chaos, destruction, and the utter annihilation of her enemies. The humans may have surprised her once, but they would never surprise her again. Meanwhile, on the Vanguard, Ilara Quinn was preparing for the fight she knew was coming. She and her officers had studied the patterns of Imperial movements and had seen the telltale signs of an impending strike. Valrex's fleet was on the move. "We don't have much time," Ilara said to her crew as they gathered in the war room. "The Empire is coming for us, but we fought to get this far, and we're not about to let them destroy us now. We need to rally every force we have. If we're going to survive this, we need to make sure we hit them first." Her words rang with authority. There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt in her mind. She had spent years building this moment, and now it was time to act. "We've gathered intel on Valrex's fleet," said Kiran, the young lieutenant who had once questioned their chances. His voice was stronger now. and there was fire in his eyes. She's moving toward the Cygus system. It's one of the weakest links in Imperial space. If we strike there, we can force her to divert her attention. We need to hit them hard and fast. Ilara nodded. I want every ship we have in position within the next 6 hours. We can't let them make the first move. We'll meet them head-on, show them that humanity isn't afraid to fight back. We've been pushed to the edge, and now we're going to push back. The humans weren't ready to match the Empire ship for ship, not yet, but they didn't need to. What they lacked in size, they made up for in ingenuity. Their fleet had been assembled with a focus on agility, stealth, and precision. They had a few surprises in store, tactics that Valrex and the Empire's strategists would never see coming. The plan was simple. Hit Valrex's fleet before it could get into position and establish a full blockade. Disrupt her communications. Throw her into chaos. Take out their supply lines and make it clear that humanity was not going to sit idly by while the Empire crushed them. They would not be the prey anymore. Ilara's mind was sharp, every piece of the plan clicking into place. As her crew dispersed to their posts, she took one last look out the viewport of the Vanguard. The stars stretched out before her, vast and endless. But this time, they felt different. They felt like a battlefield. A place where humanity could finally carve its own future. And for the first time in centuries, the Terrans didn't feel small. They didn't feel like the underdogs. They felt like they had a chance. And that chance was now. The Vanguard surged forward, its sleek frame cutting through the blackness of space as it aligned itself with the rest of the Terran fleet. Ilara Quinn stood at the command console, eyes locked on the tactical display. The moment of truth had arrived, and her heart beat with the rhythm of the battle to come. Valrex's fleet was moving toward the Cygus system, exactly as they had predicted. Ilara knew that if they could catch the Empire off guard, they could disrupt Valrex's attack and buy humanity precious time. The plan was risky. No one had ever attempted a direct confrontation with the Empire on this scale, but there was no other choice. The time for guerrilla tactics was over. The Empire had pushed them too far, and the Terran people had proven that they would fight, not just to survive, but to win. Status report, Ilara ordered, her voice calm but firm. Fleet is in position, Commander, Kiran replied, his fingers flying over the controls. We've got 3 divisions ready to engage. Our stealth ships are already moving to intercept their forward scouts. We've also initiated a blockade around the Cygus system. We're cutting off their reinforcements before they can even reach the planet. Ilara nodded. The Empire wouldn't know what hit them. The human fleet wasn't large, but every ship was a razor-sharp tool designed for precision strikes. Their ships had been outfitted with advanced weaponry, laser cannons that could pierce Imperial shields, stealth tech to evade detection, and cloaking devices to keep their position hidden until the last possible moment. They wouldn't let Valrex's forces turn this into another slaughter. The first sign that their plan was working came when a series of small Imperial patrol ships, sent ahead as scouts, began to go dark, one by one. The stealth ships had done their job, slipping past Imperial sensors and eliminating the smaller patrols silently, without leaving a trace. Valrex would soon realize that her once straightforward mission had been interrupted. A comms officer called out, Admiral Valrex's flagship, the Imperium, is emerging from the warp gate, Commander. She's bringing the full fleet. They're targeting our lead division. Ilara's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't show it. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The fight was here, and it was now. Prepare the fleet. Hold your positions. Engage when ready. Let's show them what humanity is capable of. The moment the Empire's fleet came into view, the battle erupted. Imperial warships, massive and imposing, loomed out of the blackness, their hulls bristling with weapons. But the Terran ships were faster, more nimble, their crews more agile in their tactics. The first shots rang out, bright streaks of energy lancing through the darkness. A wave of Terran fighters broke away from the fleet, diving toward the Imperial lines in tight, coordinated formations. The Empire's guns opened fire, but they were slow to target the quick, unpredictable movements of the Terran ships. The battle was chaotic, intense, and loud in ways that only space combat could be. But there was one thing that set the Terran fleet apart from the Empire's war machines: strategy. Ilara had carefully planned every move, each division poised to strike with precision. The Imperial ships, large and powerful, couldn't keep up with the quick, surgical maneuvers of the Terran vessels. "Divert all power to the forward shields," Kirin called out, his voice tense but controlled. "We've got 2 Imperial dreadnoughts closing in on our position. They're trying to flank us." Ilara gritted her teeth. The fight was going to be harder than she had hoped. She had expected the Empire to come in force, but they were more coordinated than she anticipated. But that was fine. She knew exactly how to deal with this. The Empire had one major flaw: complacency. They were used to winning, used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers. But humanity had something they didn't: the ability to think outside the box. "Target their weak spots," Ilara ordered. "Hit their engines and communication arrays. Take them down from the inside out. Don't give them time to regroup." The Vanguard sped toward the nearest Imperial dreadnought, its engines roaring as it tore through the battlefield. Ilara's hands were steady on the controls as her ship weaved between enemy fire, dodging blasts that might have taken out lesser ships. Her fleet followed her lead, using the chaos of the battle to slip in close to their targets, taking out key systems with surgical strikes. The battle raged on, but it was clear that the Empire was starting to falter. Their ships, though powerful, lacked the adaptability of the Terran fleet. The more the Terrans struck, the more the Empire's resolve began to crumble. Imperial officers scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The Terrans had taken the initiative, and they weren't letting go. In the midst of it all, Valrex watched from her flagship, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. The humans, those insignificant, weak creatures, were not only surviving, they were pushing back. The line she had drawn, the line that the Empire had counted on to keep humanity in its place, was being erased right before her eyes. The battle wasn't over, not yet, but the tide had turned. And for the first time in centuries, the Empire was on the defensive. The battle raged in the vastness of space, a deadly dance of light and shadow, fire and metal. Ilara Quinn's strategy was unfolding exactly as she had planned. But the cost was high. The Empire's warships were formidable, and despite the agility and precision of the human fleet, the battle was far from won. Every Terran ship that struck an Imperial target was met with a counterstrike, and every victory came at a cost of lives. But the momentum was unmistakable. The Empire was losing ground. On the Vanguard, Ilara stood at the command center, her hands steady on the console, eyes scanning the battlefield. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face as another Imperial dreadnought, one of the flagship's escorts, went up in a brilliant explosion, its hull splitting apart. The Vanguard's tactical team had successfully breached its shields and disabled its engines, leaving the massive vessel drifting helplessly in space. "Good work," Ilara said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "Now move on to the next target. We're not giving them a chance to regroup." Kirin, the young lieutenant who had once doubted their chances, was no longer the uncertain officer he had been. His voice was filled with confidence as he gave orders to the fleet. "Targeting coordinates locked. Commander, the Empire's losing formation. They're scattering." Ilara allowed herself a brief moment of relief. This was it. The Empire was faltering. The battle might not be over, but it had become a matter of attrition. The Terran ships were smaller, faster, and far more coordinated than Valrex's fleet had anticipated. The Empire's once imposing numbers were beginning to lose their edge, and human ingenuity was starting to turn the tide. But Ilara knew better than to let herself relax. The real test was still to come. She had to be ready for whatever the Empire would throw at them next. She had no doubt Valrex was already formulating a new plan, one that would be more ruthless than anything they had seen so far. Meanwhile, aboard the Imperium, Admiral Valrex was seething. Her fleet had suffered heavy losses, and the Terran forces weren't just fighting. They were outthinking her at every turn. The Empire had never faced an enemy like this, and Valrex was beginning to realize that the humans were not just an underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with. "Admiral, we've lost 2 more dreadnoughts," one of her officers reported. "The humans are exploiting weaknesses in our formations. We're losing control." Valrex slammed her fist against the console, her eyes narrowing. She had underestimated them, and now the Empire was paying the price. But Valrex was not one to admit defeat. She had faced challenges before, and she would face this one with the same relentless determination that had made her the Empire's most feared strategist. "Prepare the reserve fleet," Valrex commanded, her voice cold and unwavering. "We're not done yet. This is just the beginning." As the Imperial fleet scrambled to regroup, Ilara's crew was already preparing for the next phase of the battle. They had to press their advantage while they still had it. The human ships, though battle-worn, were still capable of moving with deadly speed and precision. They were hunting now, not just defending. The Empire had drawn its line in the sand, but humanity had crossed it, and there was no going back. "Get ready," Ilara said, her voice steady but urgent. "The real fight's about to begin." Kiran's face lit up with a grim smile. "They'll be coming at us with everything they've got. But we're ready. We've got their number." Ilara's mind raced as she reviewed the tactical data. She knew Valrex was no fool. The Imperial commander would be scrambling to regroup, calling in reinforcements, and likely preparing a counteroffensive designed to crush the Terran fleet once and for all. But Ilara had studied the Empire for years. She knew their tactics, their weaknesses, and this time she was ready to exploit them. "Don't let up," Ilara ordered. "This is where we win or lose. We've got them on the ropes, but we can't let them recover." The Terran ships, battered but unbowed, prepared for the next wave of battle. Their resolve was unbreakable. The Empire might have had the firepower, but humanity had the will to fight, to adapt, and to survive. And as the enemy fleets gathered for their final push, Ilara knew one thing. The Empire had underestimated humanity before, and they would do so again at their peril. The line had been crossed, and there would be no retreat. The time for survival was over. Now it was time for the Empire to learn the true cost of their oppression. The final clash was upon them. Valrex's reserve fleet had arrived in full force, reinforcements from the deepest reaches of Imperial space, their formidable ships descending onto the battlefield with calculated precision. She was not the type to let a fight slip away, and this was her last chance to crush the Terran resistance before it could gather full strength. The Empire's pride had been wounded, but now they would prove their dominance. The size of the fleet alone should have been enough to decimate anything in its path. But Ilara Quinn had other plans. The human fleet, though battered and scattered, had become a tight-knit force, focused, determined, and organized like never before. The battle had pushed them to the edge, but it had also forged them into something stronger than they had ever been. Fighters who understood that this wasn't just about survival. It was about liberation. "All ships, listen up," Ilara's voice echoed through the communication network. "This is it. We've done the impossible, and now we finish what we started. We will not go back to being slaves of the Empire. Today we make them understand that humanity is not their prey. Today, we take our galaxy back." The fleet responded with a unified cheer over the comms, their voices full of grit and defiance. They knew what was at stake. Each ship, no matter how small, was crucial to the outcome. The human fleet had been prepared for this moment for years, weeks spent building not just weapons, but the tactics to match, outsmart, and outmaneuver the Empire's sheer might. It wasn't about strength in numbers anymore. It was about knowing the Empire's weaknesses better than they knew their own. The battle began anew, this time on a far more aggressive note. The Imperial ships advanced in a thick wall, hoping to overwhelm the Terrans with their sheer firepower. But the humans, with their advanced stealth technology and agile maneuvers, slipped between their enemies like shadows, striking from unexpected angles. The Empire had expected to finish what it started, but it was now being forced into a retreat. "Focus fire on the lead dreadnoughts," Ilara ordered. "Break their lines, and the rest will follow." A wave of Terran ships dove toward the Imperial lines, laser fire cutting through the cold expanse of space. The Vanguard was at the forefront, its weapon systems pulsing with deadly energy, sending blasts into the heart of the closest Imperial vessel. The energy shields of the enemy flickered and flared, but the Terrans were relentless. They had come for this moment. In the chaos, Valrex's flagship, the Imperium, turned its vast guns on the Vanguard, locking onto Ilara's ship with deadly precision. The battle was reaching its boiling point, and the Empire's biggest asset was now focused on bringing down the Terran leader. But Valrex's mistake was underestimating the humans' ability to adapt. Ilara leaned forward, eyes sharp as she watched the feed. "Prepare to evade and counter in 3, 2. The Vanguard suddenly veered sharply to the right, evading a barrage of fire that would have decimated any other ship in its class. As Valrex's weapons locked on, the human fleet coordinated a swift counterattack, targeting the Imperium's weapons arrays and shield generators. For the first time, Valrex felt the dread of vulnerability. Her flagship, the heart of her fleet, was under attack, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The next few minutes were a blur of flashing lights and reverberating blasts. Terran ships came from all sides, breaching the Imperial formations one by one, each strike more powerful than the last. And as Valrex watched helplessly, one of her dreadnoughts was obliterated in a catastrophic explosion. The force of it sent ripples through the fleet, shattering the Empire's once impenetrable command. It was only then that Valrex realized the full scope of her defeat. She had failed. The Empire had underestimated humanity, and in doing so, it had made the fatal mistake of assuming that brute force could break the will of a species. "All units," Ilara's voice rang out, filled with quiet triumph. "This is our victory. The Empire's line is shattered. We've won." The remaining Imperial forces, scattered and disorganized, were now ripe for the picking. With the Imperium in disarray and Valrex's command in chaos, the Terran fleet moved in with precision, systematically crippling the rest of the Imperial fleet. It was no longer a battle. It was a rout. Within hours, the Imperial forces had surrendered or were retreating in disarray, unable to continue the fight. The message had been sent. The Galactic Empire had been crossed, and humanity had delivered a decisive blow. Back aboard the Vanguard, Ilara allowed herself a moment to breathe. The journey had been long, and the fight had been costly, but they had done the impossible. Humanity had stood up to the Empire, had fought back, and had won. "We've crossed the line," Ilara whispered to herself, watching the stars outside the window. "And now the galaxy is ours."